Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and unless you've been with me from the very beginning, you'll never see me using a tool like this when I'm managing my worm bins. Because I do remember using metal tools to manage my worm bins, and then one of my viewers chimed in to say, "Oh my goodness, metal tools, what are you trying to do? Kill your worms?" And from that point forward, I never placed another metal tool into any of my systems. But the tool still remains here many years later. What for? Why not just take it back out to the garage with the rest of the gardening stuff? Because I found a really good use for it down here. And that's to do this. Perforating cardboard. And those of you who've been with me for a while might know what's next if we've got perforated cardboard. Yep. Today we're checking in on the now 300-day-old African nightcrawler worm bins, where they've been foraging, which means we've been giving them no new bedding over the past 69 days, and those half a dozen or so check-ins was up until 11 days ago being done with no bedding. And I think at this point, just based on the appearance of the material, because it looked really good last time, I think we are ready to start the migration of the worms, try to get them to round up in a certain section of the bin that we're going to partition off with that piece of perforated cardboard, so we can do a really easy haul out of the worms, and at the same time with that partition, protect those lovely castings from getting littered with any bedding materials or anything like that. So I'm going to slip on a glove, get these systems up on the bench, and we're going to get to work. Our method for feeding over the past few check-ins has just been to plop the food right out on the surface of the material on top. And that's what we're seeing, little fragments and leftovers of here. The plastic, when it comes back on after we've set up our migration, is going to cover only the feeding zone, and we're going to be leaving the material to dry a little bit better now. You saw how this one was folded over to reduce its coverage, and that was with the intention of allowing this one to maybe dry off a little bit more. I can even see just from its color how it's darker. I'm not sure if the camera's picking it up, but that must mean there's still more moisture over here. At this point, both systems will be left to air out and dry, hopefully making the material less and less hospitable for the worms to want to remain in, not to mention the fact that there's no new bedding coming in, no food. As the remnants of leftover food, bedding, and moisture start to diminish, the worms will get mobile, looking for something better, and that's what we're going to be setting up for them today. But before we do, this is going to be our chance to just look through all the material. I was picking through the stuff last time, and I, couldn't help, because it is one of my key measures for progress, is the leaf stems, as many of you know. So leaf stems to me are a lot of times the thing that tell me, hey, you still got to keep going. There's still leaf stems in here. And, I'm not going to sweat it. I think they're just going to continue breaking down here naturally. And even if they're not broken down, they're just going to be so fragile that they'll just break apart over time. I don't think we're going to end up with some sort of a faulty some sort of defective batch of vermicompost because there's a few not totally broken down leaf stems lingering in the stuff. So worms everywhere. Looks really nice. Even here, where I believe we didn't feel as much moisture as in the other one, I'm feeling a lot of moisture. I'm starting to wonder if we would have been better off perhaps leaving these systems uncovered with no plastic last time we checked in here. Well, whatever. There's no going back and fixing things. There's only the knowledge with which we're armed to maybe do a little better next time. So let's continue with the aeration and inspection of the material. An inspection of our lovely wormy friends too, who are everywhere in this material so far. We've only aerated a quarter of the bin. Still got a little bit more to go. See, I'm starting to see some of that stuff that I don't like to see is like right there, an impression, like a footprint, you know. Before too, I think I bumped into something like that and I could see, or maybe just the way it came out of my hand, it took the shape of the material it was up against, and to me it just seems like that right there is an immediate visual clue that it's just way too damp and muddy. When I was reviewing the video from last time, I think what I was really trying to do, I turned the volume all the way up and I was trying to see if I can hear the sound of the material as I go through it and aerate it. And there was a little bit of sound coming off of it, not like a, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to do that again, but that was my little sound effect to say, you know, is that what I'm looking for, or some sort of evidence of that level of excessive moisture. And well, if it was that damp, I'm sure in places it would make exactly that kind of a sound, but I'm not hearing anything like that, which is promising. So we've done a good job spreading everything out level, when what we probably should have done was immediately prepare for what we know is next, which is the creation of the feeding zone. I'll do it over on the side that's closer to you guys, the camera edge, so I can kind of pull in my own direction to bring in some of this material. Once again, becoming compacted, which is exactly what I didn't want, right? So maybe we'll just grab that edge of compacted material, bring it out here, and I guess when we backfill against our little partition, we'll try to do so with without letting the material get too stuck together. What the heck? Does it matter at all? Who's judging me? Are the worms going to provide poor feedback on how their master is treating them? Well, I do my best, but I'm not perfect, I'll admit. Yeah, I'm wondering how long it's going to take for this stuff to start drying out a little bit, to the point where the worms are going to voluntarily want to leave this stuff. I'm trying to stack the deck as much as I can in my favor, from the perspective of not only trying to create that repulsion aspect of it that we touched on earlier with the diminishing moisture content and diminishing food and bedding content. There's also that aspect of it that is meant to lure, you know, become a reason why they would want to come over, and ultimately not just come over but stay. So that's the part of it we're getting into now. I've got these soiled paper towels here. Maybe we can even lay these in here as further protection at the bottom to make sure none of our shredded paper cardboard can slip under and contaminate our lovely batch of vermicompost with scraps of paper and cardboard. Let the paper and cardboard remain over here in the feeding zone, along with the other things that we're going to be replenishing it with, such as moisture and food. But let's start with the bedding. I mean, technically we've already got some bedding type materials laid in here, but what we're going to use for the most part is a few handfuls of my prepared bedding. This is just shredded paper cardboard, and look at me doing exactly what I was trying to avoid, contaminating our lovely vermicompost. Although, you know, it's likely that the stuff will eventually, after it's dried out to the point where it's possible to do so, it's very likely that we'll screen the material. Even the last batch of stuff that I evacuated worms from, before I put it into buckets, I figured, hey, why don't I screen it? And turned out really nice. And that to me looks like a pretty spacious feeding zone. I don't know, it feels like I used to make feeding zones perhaps half this size. For some reason they're their size seems to be increasing. So here's what I bought down for them from the refrigerator. Well, the coffee was not refrigerated, but the kitchen scraps, the veggies and stuff were. The majority of it is, well, I saw a lot of green here on top, and I know some of that is Coral Rob. I think some of it might be lettuce. And I can also see some peels of orange and banana. Let's drop it in here, but let's position it far away. I don't know if it makes any difference, but trying to make it such that they've got to come through all this bedding all the way to that far edge to get at the food that we're giving them. And then that's hopefully going to bring them so far in that they'll not even consider turning back. So some of this was contributed food stuffs. So while I'm at it, I like to take a peek at what I'm feeding the worms exactly, since it's not a medley that I assembled myself. But I can see there's even a little bonus bedding material right there in the form of a soiled napkin. Very nice. Nice feeding. Let's not end there. We're going to be trying to provide them with a space that's got the bedding that they're craving after not getting any after all this time, the food that they've become accustomed to, having the supply of replenished regularly. It's just over here now instead of over there, so come get it. And I think before we can consider this horizontal migration feeding zone as complete, we got to just give it a little bit more bedding just to cap off this lovely assortment of food items here. And then we even happen to have a couple feeding zone indicators in the form of these coffee filters to put on so that the migration may begin. Let's get things buttoned up here and let these little guys get started. Before we, I think before we cover up with our feeding zone indicators, ooh, look at that little piece of food scrap fell off. I figure let's bring in the other aspect of our horizontal migration feeding zone that's meant to attract a crowd, which is the moisture. My prepared bedding is prepared with moisture, so it's damp already, and I know that the frozen fruits and veggies we just fed them are going to also contribute moisture. But here's my spray bottle. It's going to dispense a good bit of moisture quite quickly, and let's stack the deck in every possible way in our favor to achieve our objective, which is to get the worms to come on over here. So I'm sure that if we come back in here in another, whatever, I don't know how long it'll be before we come back in here to check on them, but we will be back to see how they're coming along, make sure the migration's progressing, the depopulation, and sometimes I'll even pop in on systems like these to see what I can do about helping with the drying in the form of me aerating, coming in here and stirring this stuff around, because after a few days the stuff out here on the surface will have had a chance to dry off a bit, leaving the stuff right below it quite damp, and also, being such that it would benefit from being on the surface to dry a bit. And if I can remember, maybe I'll be back to do a little bit of that sort of stuff. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. With the worm farming game, sometimes life just gets in the way. But I think we're pretty much done. Let's just look around here in terms of what else I bought down here for the setup. I think we're in pretty good shape. I mean, it's not that much different from a typical worm bin check-in. We're just giving them food, right? But let's see. But in this case, the food is being positioned in a place where the aim is going to be to round them up and haul them out. So I think what we've got here is the makings of a nice migration, hopefully. This dampness is going to work against us for a while, but we're going to do what we can to help it dry. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.